The morning sun cast long shadows across the small farm as Sienna Walsh walked through her vegetable garden. At 50 years old, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades handling dangerous situations. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her weathered hands showed the calluses of both her old life and her new one. Rex, her 12-year-old German shepherd, followed slowly behind her. His black and tan coat had patches of gray around his muzzle, and his movements were stiff with age. But his dark eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the best bomb detection dogs in the military. The farm stretched across 25 acres of gently rolling hills in the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Sienna had purchased it 3 years ago with her military savings and settlement money, seeking a place where she and Rex could find peace after their abrupt retirement from service. The property had been neglected by its previous owners, but Sienna had methodically restored it, finding therapeutic value in the physical work of rebuilding something from near ruin. "Come on, old boy," Sienna said softly, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "Let's check the tomatoes." The vegetable garden was her pride and joy. Neat rows of tomatoes, corn, beans, squash, and herbs that she sold at the local farmer's market. She had learned farming through trial and error, reading books and consulting with neighboring farmers who had been generous with their advice to the quiet veteran who had moved into their community. 3 years had passed since they had left their old life behind. 3 years since the incident that changed everything. Sienna tried not to think about that day, but sometimes, in quiet moments like this, the memories would surface, the sound of running footsteps, the urgent radio calls, the terrible moment when everything went wrong. She shook her head, focusing on the present. The small town of Millbrook had been good to them. People here knew she was a veteran, but they didn't ask too many questions. They accepted her as the quiet woman who grew the best vegetables in the county and minded her own business. The farmhouse itself was a modest 2-story structure built in the 1940s. Sienna had spent months renovating it, replacing worn flooring, updating the electrical system, and creating a comfortable space for herself and Rex. The living room featured a large stone fireplace where Rex spent most of his time during cold weather, and the kitchen had wide windows that looked out over the fields. Her farm was small but productive. She grew tomatoes, corn, beans, and squash on the main acreage, with smaller plots dedicated to herbs and specialty vegetables. Every Saturday, she would load her truck and drive to the farmer's market in the town square. The routine was comforting. It was predictable. It was safe. But Sienna couldn't completely escape her past. Even after 3 years, she still found herself checking doorways before entering rooms. She still noticed things that others missed: suspicious packages, unusual behavior, potential threats. Old habits from her days as an explosive ordnance disposal specialist died hard. When she walked through town, she automatically scanned for escape routes and defensive positions. She noticed which vehicles had been parked in the same spots for too long, which people seemed to be observing others rather than going about their business. It was an unconscious process now, as natural as breathing, but it sometimes made her feel isolated from the peaceful rhythms of civilian life. Rex had been with her through it all. They had trained together, worked together, saved lives together. When she decided to leave the military, she couldn't bear to let him retire to a facility. He was her partner, her friend, her family. Where she went, he went. The German shepherd had adapted to farm life better than Sienna had initially expected. Though his joints were stiff from age and old injuries, he still patrolled the property daily, keeping watch over the chickens and alerting Sienna to any unusual activity. His protective instincts remained strong, and he had already established himself as the unofficial guardian of the farm. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, Sienna's phone buzzed. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, asking if she had any fresh corn for sale. Mrs. Chen ran the local bakery and often purchased vegetables from Sienna for her daily soup specials. Small-town life was full of these simple interactions, and Sienna found comfort in them. "I'll bring some by this afternoon," she texted back. The rest of the morning passed peacefully. Sienna tended to her crops, checking for signs of disease or pest damage. She fixed a loose board on the chicken coop, a task that required both carpentry skills and patience as the chickens expressed their displeasure at having their routine disrupted. She prepared lunch for herself and Rex, who had his own special diet to accommodate his aging digestive system. Rex spent most of his time in his favorite spot under the large oak tree that dominated the front yard. From there, he could observe the road leading to the farm while remaining in comfortable shade. Sienna had placed a weathered blanket there for him, and he would lie for hours watching the world with patient eyes, occasionally lifting his head when a car passed or a bird landed nearby. After lunch, Sienna decided to make a trip to town. She needed to mail a package to her sister in California. Some of her homemade preserves and a letter updating her family on life in Millbrook. She also needed to pick up some supplies from the hardware store: new hinges for the barn door and replacement parts for her irrigation system. Rex looked up hopefully when she grabbed her keys. Despite his age and stiffness, he still enjoyed these trips to town. The change of scenery did them both good, and Sienna suspected that he missed the activity and purpose of their former life more than he let on. "Want to come with me, boy?" Rex's tail wagged slowly, and he pushed himself to his feet with the careful deliberation of an elderly dog. He had learned to pace himself, avoiding sudden movements that might aggravate his arthritis, but his enthusiasm for outings remained undimmed. They climbed into Sienna's old Ford pickup truck, a reliable vehicle she had purchased from a local farmer who was upgrading to something newer. Rex settled into the passenger seat with practiced ease, his head held high as he surveyed the familiar route to town. The drive to Millbrook's main street took only 10 minutes along winding country roads lined with farms and wooded areas. Sienna appreciated the rural setting. It reminded her of her childhood in similar countryside, before military service had taken her to deserts and urban combat zones around the world. Millbrook itself was the kind of small American town that seemed frozen in time. The main street featured buildings from the early 1900s, most of them carefully maintained by business owners who took pride in their community's appearance. There was Murphy's Market, the general store that served as an informal community center; Bob's Barbershop, where local men gathered for haircuts and conversation; the post office, bank, and a handful of other businesses that kept the town functioning. Sienna parked in front of the post office and rolled down the windows for Rex. The afternoon was warm, but not uncomfortable, and she knew she would only be inside for a few minutes. "I'll just be a few minutes," she told him, a ritual they had established.
The post office was busy for a Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Patterson, the postmaster, greeted Sienna with a warm smile. Eleanor Patterson was a woman in her 60s who had worked at the post office for over 30 years and knew everyone in town by name. She and Sienna had developed a friendly relationship based on mutual respect and shared love of gardening. They chatted about the weather and the upcoming county fair while Sienna mailed her package. The county fair was one of Millbrook's biggest annual events, featuring agricultural competitions, local crafts, and traditional fair food. Sienna had been considering entering some of her vegetables in the competition, though she was still adjusting to the idea of putting herself forward in community events. "You should definitely enter your tomatoes," Mrs. Patterson encouraged. "I bought some at the farmer's market last week, and they were the best I've had in years." It was the kind of normal, everyday interaction that Sienna treasured. No talk of military service, dangerous missions, or traumatic memories. Just two neighbors discussing vegetables and community events. When she emerged from the post office, Rex was standing alert in the truck, his ears pricked forward. He was looking toward the small general store across the street, his body language indicating that something had caught his attention. Sienna followed his gaze but didn't see anything unusual. Murphy's Market looked exactly as it always did. A few customers going in and out, the familiar red and white striped awning fluttering in the light breeze, the wooden sign advertising daily specials. "What is it, boy?" she asked, scratching his head. Rex whined softly, still focused on something across the street. His nose was working, testing the air with the methodical precision that Sienna remembered from their working days. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was focused attention of the kind he had displayed when detecting threats. Sienna had learned to trust his instincts completely. During their years of service together, Rex had saved countless lives with his ability to detect explosives. His nose was incredibly sensitive, and he could identify the scent of various explosive materials from remarkable distances. More importantly, he had never given a false positive during their entire career together. But they weren't in a war zone anymore. This was Millbrook, where the biggest excitement was usually the annual pumpkin festival or high school football games. Still, something had caught Rex's attention, and Sienna's military training told her to take it seriously. "Let's take a look," she said, clipping Rex's leash to his collar. Sienna crossed the street with Rex at her side, his movement more purposeful now that they were investigating whatever had caught his attention. The general store, Murphy's Market, was a local institution that had been serving the community for 3 generations. Tom Murphy, the current owner, was the grandson of the store's founder, and he took pride in maintaining both the business and its role as a community gathering place. The store sold everything from groceries to fishing tackle, hardware supplies to local crafts. It was the kind of establishment that small towns depended on, where you could buy milk and bread, pick up your prescription from the pharmacy counter in the back, and catch up on local news all in one stop. A few people were coming and going as usual. Mrs. Henderson with her weekly grocery shopping, old Mr. Peters picking up his newspaper and coffee, a young mother with 2 children in tow buying snacks and drinks. Everything looked completely normal to the casual observer. But Rex's behavior was becoming more agitated. His nose was working overtime, and he was pulling gently toward the side of the building. Sienna let him lead her around to the narrow alley between Murphy's Market and the barbershop next door. The alley was about 6 feet wide, serving as a delivery area for both businesses. Delivery trucks would pull in here to unload supplies, and both store owners used the space for storage of items that didn't fit inside their buildings. There were a few trash cans, some wooden pallets, and other ordinary commercial detritus. There, sitting against the brick wall about halfway down the alley, was an ordinary-looking backpack. It was dark blue canvas with black straps, the kind of bag that thousands of students and travelers carried every day. To most people, it would have appeared to be forgotten luggage, or perhaps a student's bag left behind after a trip to the store. But Rex was now focused entirely on the backpack, his body tense with training and instinct. He didn't approach it directly. His training had taught him to alert and maintain distance from potentially dangerous objects. Instead, he sat down about 10 feet away and gave a specific bark that Sienna recognized immediately. The sound hit her like a physical blow. It was Rex's alert bark, the same bark he had used hundreds of times during their service to indicate the presence of explosive materials. The sound was sharp, urgent, and unmistakable. Completely different from his normal barks or the sounds he made when playing or seeking attention. Sienna's heart began to race, and suddenly she was back in her old life, adrenaline coursing through her veins as her military training took over. The peaceful afternoon in small-town America disappeared, replaced by the heightened awareness and tactical thinking that had kept her alive through 2 combat deployments. "Good boy, Rex." "Stay," she commanded, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. Sienna quickly assessed the situation with the methodical approach she had learned through years of EOD training. The backpack was positioned near the side entrance of the general store, where delivery trucks often parked. If it contained an explosive device, its placement would maximize damage to the building and anyone inside. The timing was concerning as well. It was mid-afternoon on a Tuesday, typically a busy time for the store as people stopped by after work or school. There were people walking by on the main street, unaware of any potential danger. Children would be getting out of school soon, and many of them passed by this area on their way home. Her military training kicked in automatically, running through the standard protocols for handling suspicious devices in civilian areas. First priority, clear the area of innocent people. Second priority, contact authorities and request specialized support. Third priority, establish and maintain a safe perimeter until professional bomb disposal teams could arrive. She pulled out her phone and called 911, forcing herself to speak calmly and clearly despite the adrenaline surge. This is Sienna Walsh at Murphy's Market on Main Street. I have a potentially dangerous situation here. I need you to contact the State Police Bomb Squad and begin evacuation of the immediate area. The dispatcher, a young woman named Julie, who Sienna had met at various town events, sounded confused by the unusual request. Ma'am, what kind of dangerous situation are we talking about? There's a suspicious package that my trained detection dog has alerted on. I'm a former military EOD specialist with 10 years of experience. This needs to be taken seriously and handled by professionals. The authority and confidence in Sienna's voice must have convinced Julie that this wasn't a crank call, because her tone immediately became more professional and urgent. Yes, ma'am. I'm dispatching all available units now and contacting the state police. What's your exact location? Side alley of Murphy's Market, between the store and Bob's barber shop. The suspicious package is approximately 15 feet from the store's side entrance. You need to establish a perimeter and keep people at least 300 feet away from this location. Understood. Officers are en route. ETA approximately 5 minutes. Sienna hung up and looked around, realizing that she couldn't wait for official help to begin clearing the area. There were too many people nearby, and they had no idea of the potential danger they faced. Every minute that passed increased the risk that someone would wander too close to the device, or that it might detonate if it was on a timer. She needed to act fast, but she also needed to avoid causing a panic that might make the situation worse. People who were frightened might run in the wrong direction or make poor decisions that could put them in greater danger. Walking quickly to the front of the store, she found Tom Murphy restocking the newspaper stand outside the main entrance. Tom was a 60-year-old man who had known Sienna since she moved to town. He was friendly, but not intrusive, and she had always appreciated his straightforward manner. Tom, she called to him urgently, I need you to evacuate your store immediately. There's a situation that requires everyone to leave the building right now. Tom Murphy looked surprised, then concerned as he registered the seriousness in Sienna's voice. What kind of situation, Sienna? Is there a fire? The kind where we need everyone out of the building right now, she said firmly, avoiding specific details that might cause panic. Trust me on this, Tom. Get everyone out calmly but quickly. Something in her tone and bearing, perhaps the automatic authority that came from years of giving life and death orders, made him nod without further questions. Tom went inside and began ushering customers out, explaining that there was a possible gas leak and the building needed to be evacuated as a precaution. Sienna moved quickly to the barber shop next door. Bob Mitchell was cutting the hair of Dr. Stevens, the town's only physician. The two men were engaged in their typical afternoon conversation about local sports and politics. Bob, Dr. Stevens, Sienna announced as she entered. I need you to close up shop and get everyone out of this building immediately. Dr. Stevens, a man in his 50s who had served as a medic in the Army before medical school, picked up on the urgency in her voice immediately. "Sienna, what's going on? Is someone hurt?" "Possible gas leak affecting the whole block," she said, sticking to the cover story that would get people to safety without causing panic. "Just being cautious, but we need everyone clear of the area." Both men nodded and began the process of closing up quickly. Bob helped Dr. Stevens remove the barber's cape and rapidly cleaned up his tools while Dr. Stevens gathered his jacket and keys. By now, people on the street were beginning to notice the unusual activity. Customers were emerging from Murphy's Market looking confused, and word was starting to spread that something was happening. Sienna positioned herself at the mouth of the alley, keeping Rex with her while preventing anyone from wandering too close to the suspicious package. She could hear sirens in the distance, getting louder as they approached. Her phone rang. It was Julie from dispatch. "Ma'am, Officer Martinez will be first on scene, about 2 minutes out. He's asking about your background and credentials so he knows what he's dealing with." 10 years EOD with the Army, served 2 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. My partner here is Rex, a trained explosives detection dog with over 300 successful detections during his service career. We've handled hundreds of situations like this. Copy that. I'm also confirming that State Police Bomb Squad has been notified and is en route. Sienna knew Officer Martinez. He was a good cop and former military himself who would understand the gravity of the situation. She was relieved it would be someone who wouldn't question her assessment or waste time with unnecessary skepticism. A crowd was starting to gather, drawn by the evacuation and the approaching sirens. Human nature made people curious about unusual events, and Sienna realized she needed to take control of the situation before that curiosity led someone into danger. She stepped forward, raising her voice to address the growing group of onlookers. Her military training had taught her how to project authority and command attention in crisis situations. "Everyone, I need your attention," she called out, using the command voice she had developed during her years of service. "I'm asking everyone to move back to the other side of the street for safety reasons. This is just a precaution while we investigate a potential hazard." "What's going on, Sienna?" called out Mrs. Patterson from the post office, who had emerged to see what was causing the commotion. "We're investigating a suspicious package that may pose a safety risk," Sienna replied, choosing her words carefully. "The authorities are on their way, but I need everyone to stay at a safe distance until we know more." Most people began moving back, though some lingered out of curiosity about the unusual excitement in their quiet town. Sienna continued to direct people, using the calm but firm tone that had served her well in military situations. Officer Martinez's patrol car pulled up just as Sienna was convincing the last few stragglers to move to safety. He stepped out of his vehicle, a tall Hispanic man in his 30s with a serious expression and the bearing of someone who had seen combat. "Sienna, what do we have?" he asked, approaching her with professional calm, while keeping his voice low to avoid alarming nearby civilians. "Suspicious backpack in the alley, positioned against the wall approximately 15 feet from Murphy's side entrance." Rex alerted on it with his explosive detection bark. Based on his training, experience, and track record, there's a high probability it contains explosive materials. Martinez nodded, understanding the implications immediately. He had served as a military police officer in Iraq and knew how to read the signs of a potential bomb threat. "Where's your dog positioned now?" "Maintaining alert position at safe distance, as trained. He won't leave the area, but he won't approach the package either." "Good. I've got the bomb squad en route from the state capital, ETA about 45 minutes. Fire department and EMT are also responding." As if on cue, the fire truck rounded the corner, followed by an ambulance. The quiet Tuesday afternoon in Millbrook had suddenly become very busy, and the peaceful small-town atmosphere was replaced by the controlled urgency of emergency response. Fire Chief Rodriguez jumped down from the truck and approached Sienna and Martinez. Rodriguez was a stocky man in his 40s who had been fighting fires in rural Pennsylvania for over 20 years. He had the calm competence of someone who had seen every kind of emergency his region could produce. "What's the situation, Luis?" he asked Martinez. Martinez quickly briefed him while Sienna maintained her position watching the alley and keeping Rex calm. The dog was still alert but patient, exactly as his training had taught him. His body language showed continued focus on the suspicious package, but he remained disciplined and under control. More people were gathering, drawn by the emergency vehicles. Sienna could see familiar faces in the crowd, townspeople she had come to know over the past 3 years. Mrs. Chen from the bakery, looking worried and confused. The Patterson family from the post office. Several of her customers from the farmer's market. They looked to her for answers, recognizing that she was somehow central to whatever was happening. Chief Rodriguez made the decision to establish a formal perimeter at 500 feet from the suspicious package, extending the safety zone beyond what Sienna had initially created. Officers began setting up barriers and redirecting traffic, turning the normally busy main street into a controlled emergency zone. "Sienna," Martinez said, "the state boys want to talk to you about what you observed." She nodded, giving Rex a firm stay command before walking over to Martinez's patrol car. She picked up the radio handset, noting how familiar the weight felt in her hand despite 3 years away from military communications. "This is Sienna Walsh, former Army EOD specialist." The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, with the no-nonsense tone of someone who dealt with dangerous situations regularly. "Ms. Walsh, this is Sergeant Foster with the State Police Bomb Squad. Can you describe the package and your dog's behavior in detail?" Dark blue canvas backpack, approximately 18 inches tall by 12 inches wide, positioned against the brick wall in the alley between Murphy's Market and Mitchell's Barbershop. "My partner Rex, a trained explosives detection dog with 10 years of active service and over 300 successful detections, gave his specific alert bark and is maintaining trained distance. His behavior is consistent with positive identification of explosive materials." Copy that. "What's the immediate area like? Any civilians in the vicinity?" "Alley is narrow, approximately 6 feet wide. Brick walls on both sides, about 12 feet high. Main Street normally has moderate foot traffic, but buildings have been evacuated and perimeter established at 500 feet. We've got good crowd control in place." "Excellent work, Ms. Walsh. We'll be on scene in approximately 30 minutes. Please maintain the perimeter and keep your dog in position if possible. His continued alert will help us assess the threat level." "Understood. Rex will hold position until given release command." Sienna returned to Rex, who was still maintaining his alert position with the patience of a professional. She knelt down beside him and stroked his graying fur, feeling the familiar comfort of their partnership even in this tense situation. "Good boy, Rex. You're doing great, partner."
As they waited for the bomb squad, Sienna's mind drifted back to her years of service. She had joined the Army at 19, straight out of high school in a small farming community, not unlike Millbrook. The military had given her purpose, structure, and the chance to make a real difference in the world. Her path to explosive ordnance disposal hadn't been typical. She had started in general military service, working in logistics and transportation. But her aptitude for technical work and her ability to remain calm under pressure had caught the attention of her superiors. When the opportunity came to train for EOD work, she had jumped at the chance. The training had been brutal. Months of studying different types of explosives, learning to use sophisticated detection equipment, practicing disposal techniques on training devices that simulated real threats. The physical demands were intense, working in full protective gear in extreme temperatures, carrying heavy equipment over difficult terrain, maintaining focus during long hours of dangerous work, but the mental pressure was even greater. One mistake, one moment of carelessness or poor judgment could mean death not just for yourself, but for your entire team and any civilians in the area. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but it was also what made the work meaningful. Sienna had thrived in that environment. She had a natural talent for the technical aspects of the work, the ability to understand complex devices and think through disposal procedures logically. More importantly, she had the psychological makeup for the job, the ability to stay calm under extreme pressure, the patience to work methodically through complex problems, and the courage to make life and death decisions in seconds. Rex had joined her team during her 3rd year of service. He was 2 years old then, a young dog who had already completed months of intensive training with military dog handlers. German Shepherds were preferred for explosives detection work because of their intelligence, their strong work drive, and their ability to form close bonds with their human partners. From their first day working together, Sienna and Rex had been a perfect team. Rex had an extraordinary nose for explosives. He could detect tiny amounts of various explosive materials from distances that amazed even experienced handlers. But more than that, he had an almost supernatural ability to read Sienna's mood and intentions. They communicated with subtle gestures, glances, and voice commands that other people couldn't even notice. Their first deployment had been to Afghanistan, where they worked with infantry units to clear routes of improvised explosive devices. The work was dangerous and exhausting. They would spend hours walking roads and paths, Rex methodically checking for the scent of explosives, while Sienna watched for other signs of danger: disturbed earth, unusual objects, anything that might indicate the presence of hidden threats. The devices they encountered ranged from crude homemade bombs to sophisticated military-grade explosives. Each one required careful analysis and disposal, often under difficult conditions and time pressure. Sienna learned to work while being shot at, to make critical decisions while explosions went off nearby, to maintain focus while knowing that innocent lives depended on her skills. In their first year of deployment, they had found and helped dispose of over 200 explosive devices. Each one represented lives saved: soldiers who would make it home to their families, civilians who could travel safely on roads that had been cleared of threats. Sienna remembered one incident from early in their deployment that had established their reputation. Their unit had been tasked with clearing a route to a village where medical supplies urgently needed to be delivered. It was a hot day in August, and they had been working for hours without finding anything suspicious.
Rex had suddenly stopped and given his alert bark near a seemingly innocent pile of rocks beside the road. The infantry soldiers with them had been skeptical. It looked like nothing more than rocks that had fallen from a nearby hillside. There was no obvious disturbance of the earth, no visible wires or suspicious objects. But Sienna had learned to trust Rex completely. When he alerted, there was something there, even if human eyes couldn't see it. When the EOD team examined the site more carefully with specialized equipment, they found a sophisticated device buried beneath the rocks. It was expertly camouflaged and designed to target the medical convoy that was scheduled to pass through later that day. The device was connected to pressure plates buried in the road, set to detonate when a vehicle of the convoy's weight passed over them. If Rex hadn't detected it, the convoy would have been destroyed. The medical supplies would have been lost. And more importantly, the doctors, nurses, and drivers in the convoy would have been killed or severely injured. The villagers who were waiting for medical care would have continued to suffer. That incident had earned them both commendations, but more importantly, it had established their reputation as a team that could be trusted completely. Over the following years, other units specifically requested to work with Sienna and Rex, knowing that their expertise could mean the difference between mission success and tragedy. Chapter 4. The professionals arrive. The next 30 minutes felt like hours as they waited for the bomb squad. More emergency vehicles arrived, and the crowd of onlookers grew larger despite efforts to move them back. News traveled fast in a small town, and soon it seemed like half of Millbrook had gathered to see what was happening on their normally quiet Main Street. Sienna found herself answering the same questions over and over again. Yes, she was confident about what Rex had detected. No, she couldn't tell exactly what kind of explosive it might be without proper equipment and analysis. Yes, they were taking all necessary precautions to ensure public safety. Dr. Stevens approached her during the wait, his medical bag in hand in case anyone needed attention. Sienna, I know you don't talk much about your military service, but this is based on combat experience, isn't it? She nodded, keeping her eyes on the alley where Rex continued his patient vigil. EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Rex and I worked together for 10 years before we retired. Well, I'm grateful you're here today. Whatever that thing is, you probably just saved a lot of lives. Sienna didn't respond immediately, but his words hit her harder than she expected. For 3 years, she had been trying to forget her old life, to put the past behind her and find peace in the simple routines of farming. But today, that experience had been crucial. The skills she had tried to bury were exactly what the situation required. Mrs. Chen appeared beside her, looking worried. Sienna, should we be evacuating further? Should people go home? The professionals will be here soon, Sienna replied reassuringly. They'll make those decisions based on what they find. For now, everyone just needs to stay behind the barriers. But privately, Sienna was convinced that Rex's alert had been accurate. In all their years of working together, he had never given a false positive. His nose was too experienced, his training too thorough, for him to be wrong about something like this. Whatever was in that backpack, it posed a real threat to the community. The bomb squad arrived with the kind of organized efficiency that Sienna remembered from her own days in the service. 2 specialized vehicles pulled up to the established perimeter, and 6 technicians in protective gear began unloading their equipment with practiced precision. Sergeant Foster, the team leader, was a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and the confident manner of someone who had handled thousands of dangerous situations. She approached Sienna with professional courtesy, recognizing a fellow specialist even in civilian clothes. Ms. Walsh, I'm Sergeant Foster. Thank you for your quick response and professional handling of this situation. Your actions may have prevented a significant tragedy. Just glad I could help, Sienna replied. Happy to brief you on everything we observed. I'd like to get a detailed briefing from you before we proceed. Walk me through everything that happened, starting from the initial detection. Sienna described the events step by step, from Rex's initial alert behavior to the evacuation of the buildings and establishment of the perimeter. Foster asked detailed questions about Rex's training and experience, the exact nature of his alert behavior, and the positioning of the suspicious package. Your dog is still maintaining his alert position, Foster observed, looking toward where Rex sat patiently in the alley. He's trained to hold position until given a release command by his handler. He won't approach the device, but he won't abandon his post either. His continued alerting indicates ongoing detection of explosive materials. That's exceptional discipline for a retired dog. How old is he? 12. We both retired from active service 3 years ago, but his training and instincts are still solid. Foster nodded approvingly. We're going to set up our equipment and do a preliminary assessment with our robot. Can you call your dog back so we can work in the immediate area safely? Sienna whistled softly, a specific recall signal that Rex knew well. He immediately trotted over to her side, his job completed. He had detected the threat, maintained position until the professionals arrived, and provided ongoing confirmation of the danger. Now it was time for others to take over. The bomb squad worked with methodical precision that Sienna found both familiar and reassuring. They set up their robotic device, established communication protocols, and began the careful process of examining the suspicious package without putting human lives at risk. The robot was a sophisticated piece of equipment, equipped with cameras, sensors, and manipulator arms that would allow the technicians to examine and potentially disarm the device from a safe distance. Sienna watched the process with professional interest, noting how the technology had advanced since her own service days. The crowd of onlookers had grown even larger, held back behind barriers, but clearly fascinated by the unusual excitement in their quiet town. Sienna recognized many faces: customers from the farmers' market, neighbors from the surrounding farms, people she had come to know over the past 3 years. The atmosphere was tense, but not panicked. The professional handling of the situation by the emergency responders had reassured people that the threat was being taken seriously and managed competently. Still, there was an undercurrent of anxiety as everyone wondered what exactly was in that backpack and who might have left it there. As if to confirm Sienna's assessment, she heard Sergeant Foster's voice over the radio. "Control, we have visual confirmation of suspicious contents in the package. Initiating detailed analysis protocols." A murmur ran through the crowd as word spread that the threat was real. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in for the people of Millbrook. They had come very close to a potential tragedy, and many of them were only now realizing how serious the danger had been. Officer Martinez approached Sienna as the bomb squad continued their work. "Looks like you and Rex were right on target. Any thoughts on how something like this ends up in our little town?" Sienna shook her head. "Could be random, could be targeted. Hard to say without knowing more about the device and how it got there. Small towns aren't immune to threats. Sometimes they're chosen specifically because security is lighter and response times are longer." The disposal process took another hour as the technicians used their robotic equipment to carefully examine and analyze the device. They worked with the kind of patience and precision that Sienna remembered from her own days doing similar work, understanding that rushing could lead to catastrophic mistakes. Finally, Sergeant Foster's voice came over the radio again. "All clear. Device has been successfully neutralized. Beginning evidence collection procedures." A cheer went up from the crowd, and Sienna felt a wave of relief wash over her. The immediate danger was over, and her community was safe. Chapter 5. A Hero's Recognition. Foster approached Sienna as the team began the process of documenting and collecting evidence from the neutralized device. "Ms. Walsh, I want you to know that your actions today prevented what could have been a serious tragedy. The device was sophisticated and contained enough explosive material to cause significant structural damage and casualties. If it had detonated during busy afternoon hours with people in the surrounding buildings." She didn't finish the sentence, but Sienna understood. The casualty count could have been devastating for a small community like Millbrook. "I was just doing what I was trained to do," Sienna said quietly, uncomfortable with the praise, but understanding its importance for the official record. That training served this community extremely well today. Your dog's alert was absolutely accurate. He detected a genuine IED with approximately 3 pounds of high-grade explosive material. The device was equipped with a timer mechanism and would have detonated in approximately 2 hours. Rex, as if understanding that he was being complimented, wagged his tail slowly. Even in his advanced age, he seemed to understand that he had done important work. I've written up a full report that will go to state and federal authorities, Foster continued. They'll want to investigate how this device ended up here and whether there are any other threats in the area. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force will likely be involved. As the bomb squad began loading their equipment, the crowd started to disperse. The immediate excitement was over, but Sienna knew that the impact of this day would be felt in Millbrook for a long time to come. The next few days brought a kind of attention that Sienna had not experienced since leaving the military. Word of her actions spread quickly through Millbrook and the surrounding county, and soon reporters from regional newspapers and television stations were calling, asking for interviews. Sienna tried to maintain her privacy, declining most media requests, but the story took on a life of its own. "Local farmer prevents bombing," read the headline in the county newspaper. The article described her military background and her quick thinking in evacuating the area and calling for help. The Philadelphia Inquirer picked up the story, running it with the headline, "War Veterans Training Saves Small Town." National news outlets began calling, wanting to interview the quiet farmer who had prevented a terrorist attack. But more importantly to Sienna, the people of Millbrook began treating her differently. Where before she had been the quiet woman who grew good vegetables and kept to herself, now she was someone who had saved their community from disaster. Mrs. Chen stopped by the farm the day after the incident with a homemade apple pie and tears in her eyes. "For you and Rex," she said with a warm smile. "Thank you for protecting all of us. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Tom Murphy from the general store called to tell her that she would always have a discount at his store. "You saved my business, maybe my life too. The least I can do is help you save a few dollars on groceries." Dr. Stevens visited one evening, ostensibly to check on Rex's health, but really to express his gratitude. "Sienna, I've been thinking about what you did. Not just the technical part, calling in the experts, clearing the area, but the courage it took to step forward when you recognized danger. A lot of people would have found reasons to doubt themselves or hesitate." Sienna felt uncomfortable with all the attention. She had simply done what needed to be done, using skills she had learned long ago. But she was beginning to understand that her actions had meant more to the community than she had realized. "I've been mayor of this town for 8 years, said Mayor Patricia Williams when she visited the farm. "I've never seen anything bring the community together like this. People are talking about how grateful they are, how proud they are to have you as a neighbor." The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. A week after the incident, Officer Martinez visited her farm with a special request from the town council. "Sienna, we've been thinking about what happened, and we realize that Millbrook doesn't have any kind of emergency response capability for situations like this. We're a small town with a small budget, but we're not immune to threats." "What are you suggesting?" Sienna asked, gesturing for him to sit on the porch where Rex was enjoying the afternoon sun. "The town council wants to know if you'd be willing to serve as a consultant for emergency preparedness. Nothing formal that would interfere with your farming, no major time commitment, just someone we can call if we need advice or expertise." Sienna was quiet for a long moment, scratching Rex's ears as she considered the request. For 3 years, she had been trying to put her old life behind her, to find peace in the simple routines of farming and small-town life. But the events of the past week had shown her something important. She couldn't completely escape her past, and maybe she shouldn't try to. The skills and experience she had gained during her years of service were part of who she was. They could still serve a useful purpose. "I'd be willing to help," she said finally. "Within reason. I'm not looking to return to full-time dangerous work, but if there's a way I can help keep this community safe." Martinez smiled broadly. "That's all we're asking for." just knowing we have someone with your background available if we need advice. It makes everyone feel a little safer. That evening, as Sienna sat on her front porch watching the sunset, she found herself thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she had fled to Millbrook seeking anonymity and peace. She had wanted to forget her military career, to put the trauma and the memories behind her. But perhaps healing didn't require forgetting. Perhaps it meant finding new ways to use the experiences of the past, both good and bad, to serve others and find meaning in the present. Rex, lying beside her chair, lifted his head and looked at her with those intelligent dark eyes. He was getting old, and she knew their time together was growing shorter. But today had proven that he was still the exceptional partner she had always known him to be. "We did good work today, didn't we, boy?" she said softly. Rex's tail thumped once against the wooden porch, and Sienna smiled. For the first time in 3 years, she felt truly at peace with who she was and the choices she had made. The recognition and gratitude from the community had stirred something in Sienna that she had kept buried for years. As she went about her daily routines on the farm over the following weeks, she found her mind wandering back to her years of service, not just to the traumatic incident that had ended her career, but to the many successful missions and lives saved. One evening, as she and Rex sat by the fireplace while autumn rain drummed against the windows, Sienna decided it was time to confront those memories more directly. She had spent 3 years trying to forget, but perhaps it was time to remember, the good along with the bad. Her first real test had come during her initial deployment to Afghanistan. She was 25 then, confident in her training but untested in actual combat conditions. Rex was young too, only 3 years old, but already showing the exceptional abilities that would make him legendary among EOD teams. They had been called to clear a route through a village where intelligence suggested multiple IEDs had been planted. The local population was caught in the middle. They needed access to medical care and supplies, but the roads were too dangerous for vehicles to pass safely. Sienna remembered the weight of responsibility she had felt that day. Dozens of families were counting on her and Rex to make their world a little safer. The pressure was intense, but it was also motivating. This was why she had volunteered for EOD work, to make a direct, immediate difference in people's lives. They had worked methodically through the village, Rex's nose guiding them to 3 separate devices hidden along the main road. Each one required careful analysis and disposal. The work was slow and nerve-wracking, conducted under the watchful eyes of villagers who understood that their future safety depended on the success of this mission. The first device had been relatively simple, a crude explosive made from fertilizer and diesel fuel, buried in a shallow hole beside the road. The second was more sophisticated, incorporating military-grade explosives that had likely been stolen from government stockpiles. The third was the most dangerous, a complex device with multiple triggers designed to defeat standard disposal techniques. Each disposal operation required different approaches and tools. Sienna had to think through each device carefully, understanding not just how to neutralize it safely, but how to do so without damaging the road infrastructure that the village depended on for commerce and transportation. When the medical convoy finally made it through later that day, Sienna had watched from a distance as doctors and nurses began treating patients who had been waiting weeks for care. Children received life-saving vaccinations. Injured people got the treatment they needed to heal properly. Pregnant women received prenatal care that could mean the difference between healthy births and tragedy. That night, an elderly village man had approached her through an interpreter. "He says, 'Thank you,'" the interpreter had translated. "He says you gave his granddaughter her life back." The granddaughter was a 7-year-old girl who had been injured by an earlier explosion and needed surgery that was only possible with the medical supplies the convoy had brought. Because Sienna and Rex had cleared the route, the girl would live and recover fully, growing up to have children of her own someday. It was moments like that which had made all the danger and stress worthwhile. For 10 years, Sienna had been part of something larger than herself, something that made a real and measurable difference in the world. She remembered another mission from her second deployment, this one in Iraq. They had been working in an urban area where insurgents had been placing explosive devices in marketplace areas, deliberately targeting civilians going about their daily lives. The strategy was designed to create terror and undermine confidence in the government's ability to provide security. By making ordinary activities like shopping for food dangerous, the insurgents hoped to break down the social fabric that held communities together. One morning, Rex had alerted on a suspicious package near a fruit vendor's stall in a busy market. The market was crowded with families doing their morning shopping. Children played between the stalls while their mothers bargained for vegetables and bread. The atmosphere was lively and normal, exactly what the insurgents wanted to destroy. Sienna had faced a difficult decision. Evacuating the entire market would cause panic and disrupt people's lives, potentially playing into the insurgents' hands by showing that they could control civilian behavior through fear. But if Rex was right about the device, leaving everyone in place could result in mass casualties. She had chosen to trust her partner's judgment completely while minimizing disruption to the community. Working with local police, they had quietly evacuated the immediate area around the fruit stand, using the excuse of a gas leak to move people to safety, without acknowledging the real threat. Rex had been right. The device was sophisticated and designed to cause maximum harm during the busy morning hours when families with children would be most likely to be present. If it had detonated, dozens of innocent people would have been killed or injured, and the psychological impact on the community would have been devastating. But because of their intervention, life in the market had continued. Families had completed their shopping and gone home safely. Children had played and laughed without fear. The insurgents' attempt to terrorize the population had failed, and normal life had been preserved. Another small victory against those who sought to spread terror and chaos. Sienna realized now, sitting by her fireplace 3 years later with Rex snoring softly beside her chair, that those victories had defined her more than the final tragic incident that ended her career. For every nightmare memory of the day things went wrong, there were dozens of memories of days when things went right, when lives were saved, when communities were protected. She got up and went to her bedroom, where she kept a small wooden box on the top shelf of her closet. She hadn't opened it since moving to Millbrook, but tonight felt like the right time.
Inside the box were her military decorations, commendation letters, and photographs from her years of service. There was the Bronze Star she had received for heroism during a particularly dangerous mission in Fallujah. There were commendation letters from commanding officers praising her professionalism and dedication. There were photographs of her with Rex and other members of their EOD team, all of them young and confident, united by their shared commitment to protecting others. One photograph showed her and Rex after their most successful day in Afghanistan, a day when they had found and neutralized 7 different devices along a convoy route. The caption on the back, written in her own handwriting, read, "7 devices, 0 casualties." Rex and Sienna saved the day again. Looking at these mementos now, Sienna felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in what they had accomplished, sadness for the friends and colleagues they had lost,
Gratitude for the opportunity to have served something larger than herself. And yes, still some pain from the way it had all ended. But for the first time in 3 years, the pride and gratitude were stronger than the pain. Rex shifted beside her chair, and she reached down to stroke his graying fur. He had been with her through all of it, the successes and the failures, the triumphs and the trauma. He had never wavered in his loyalty or his courage. "We saved a lot of people, didn't we, boy?" she whispered. Rex looked up at her with those wise, patient eyes, and she felt a connection to their shared past that was both painful and healing. They had been warriors once, in the truest sense of the word. They had fought not for conquest or glory, but to protect innocent people from harm. That work had been honorable and necessary, regardless of how it had ended. As the weeks passed after the incident in Millbrook, Sienna found herself more willing to confront the memories she had spent 3 years trying to suppress. The townspeople's gratitude and recognition had reminded her that her military service had been meaningful and important. But she also knew that she couldn't fully heal without facing the incident that had ended her career, the day when everything went wrong, despite all her training and experience. It had been near the end of her second deployment to Iraq. She and Rex were part of a joint operation with local security forces to clear a suspected bomb-making facility in a residential area of Baghdad. Intelligence had suggested that insurgents were using a house in a crowded neighborhood to build and store explosive devices. The operation had been planned carefully over several weeks. They would approach the house at dawn, when the streets would be relatively empty, but there would be enough light to work safely. Local security forces would provide perimeter security, while Sienna and Rex conducted the search for explosives and bomb-making materials. Intelligence reports indicated that the house was being used as a storage and assembly facility, but that it was typically unoccupied during daylight hours. The plan was to secure the building, search for devices and materials, and document everything for intelligence purposes. Everything had started according to plan. The security teams had positioned themselves around the target house in the pre-dawn darkness, and Sienna had begun her methodical approach with Rex as the sun came up. The dog had immediately alerted on the building, confirming that explosive materials were present in significant quantities. But as they began their careful examination of the structure, the situation had deteriorated rapidly. Intelligence had been incomplete. The house wasn't just a storage facility. It was an active bomb-making laboratory with people inside who had been working through the night. The insurgents had been in the middle of preparing a massive vehicle bomb intended for a marketplace attack later that day. When they realized they were surrounded, they had made a desperate decision. Rather than surrender, they chose to detonate the explosives they had been building, turning their hideout into a massive improvised explosive device. Sienna had seen the signs seconds before the explosion: movement in an upper window, the flash of an electrical connection being made, the sudden change in Rex's behavior as he detected the immediate danger. She had shouted a warning over her radio and thrown herself behind the nearest cover, pulling Rex with her.
The blast had been enormous. The entire house had disintegrated in a fireball that could be seen for miles. The shockwave had damaged buildings for blocks around and shattered windows throughout the neighborhood. Sienna and Rex had survived because of her quick thinking and their position behind a concrete barrier, but others hadn't been so fortunate. 3 members of the local security force had been killed instantly, vaporized by the initial blast. 7 more people, soldiers and civilians alike, had been seriously injured by flying debris and the crushing pressure of the shockwave. Among the casualties was a young Iraqi translator named Ahmed, who had been working with American forces for over a year, helping to build bridges between the military and local communities. Ahmed had been a father of 2 young children, a man who had risked his life daily to help create a safer, more stable Iraq. He had been positioned too close to the building when it exploded, and despite the best efforts of the medical team, he had died from his injuries 2 days later. Sienna remembered waking up in the military hospital 3 days after the explosion, her ears ringing and her body covered in cuts from flying debris. Her first question had been about Rex, and she had cried with relief when they told her that he was alive, but injured. Rex had suffered a severe concussion and permanent damage to his hearing from the blast. He would recover physically, but his days as a working explosives detection dog were over. The injury had affected his ability to focus on scent detection for extended periods, making him unreliable for the precision work that EOD operations required. The physical injuries had healed, but the psychological trauma had been more difficult to overcome. Sienna had replayed the incident thousands of times in her mind, wondering if she could have done something differently. Should she have approached the building more cautiously? Should she have insisted on additional surveillance before beginning the operation? Could she have prevented the deaths? Her commanding officer had been clear that she bore no responsibility for what happened. The intelligence had been faulty, and she had followed proper procedures throughout the operation. The insurgents' decision to detonate their own explosives had been unpredictable and unavoidable. The investigation had concluded that there was no way anyone could have anticipated the insurgents' suicidal response. The building had been under surveillance for weeks, without any indication that it was actively occupied during the time frame when the operation was conducted. But knowing that intellectually hadn't helped with the emotional weight of the experience. Sienna had started having nightmares, vivid dreams where she relived the explosion over and over again. She had panic attacks when she heard sudden loud noises, her body responding as if she were back in that Baghdad neighborhood with debris raining down around her. Most difficult of all was the overwhelming sense of guilt about the people who had died. She knew logically that their deaths weren't her fault, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she should have been able to prevent them somehow. The military had offered counseling and support, and Sienna had tried to continue her service. But she found that she could no longer approach dangerous situations with the calm confidence that EOD work required. Every package, every device, every mission reminded her of that day in Baghdad when everything went wrong. Her hesitation and anxiety weren't just personal problems, they were professional hazards that could endanger her team. EOD work required absolute confidence and decisive action. Self-doubt and second-guessing could be fatal. After several months of struggling with these feelings, watching her performance decline, and knowing that she was becoming a liability to her unit, Sienna had made the difficult decision to retire from active service. She couldn't risk the lives of her team members by continuing to work when her judgment and nerves were compromised. Rex's injuries had made the decision easier in some ways. They could retire together, leaving the service as a team just as they had served as a team. But it had also felt like giving up, like letting the terrorists win by allowing them to end her career. For 3 years she had carried that sense of failure with her. Moving to Millbrook had been an attempt to start over, to find a new identity that wasn't defined by her military service or the trauma that had ended it. But the incident at Murphy's Market had shown her something important. The skills and instincts that had made her an effective EOD specialist were still there, still valuable, still capable of protecting innocent people. Her ability to recognize danger, respond quickly under pressure, and coordinate emergency response hadn't been lost. More importantly, she realized that her military service, including its ending, had prepared her to handle exactly this kind of situation. Her experience with trauma had taught her how precious life was and how important it was to act decisively when others were in danger. The nightmares hadn't completely stopped, but they were less frequent now. And when they came, she was able to remind herself of all the lives she and Rex had saved, all the communities they had protected, all the good they had accomplished during their years of service. Chapter 8. Healing Through Purpose. The weeks following the incident brought an unexpected peace to Sienna's life that she hadn't experienced since before her final deployment. The recognition from the community had been gratifying, but more important was the internal shift she felt. For the first time since leaving the military, she felt that her past experiences had value beyond the pain they had caused. Rex, too, seemed to benefit from their moment of renewed purpose. Though he was clearly aging, His successful detection of the explosive device had given him a new energy and confidence. He walked with more purpose, held his head higher, and seemed more engaged with the world around him. Dr. Stevens had examined Rex thoroughly after the incident and pronounced him remarkably healthy for his age. "Whatever you've been doing for him, keep it up," he had told Sienna. "He's got the spirit of a much younger dog." That successful detection seems to have reminded him of who he is. Sienna had started volunteering with the local fire department, helping them develop emergency response protocols for various scenarios. Chief Rodriguez had been enthusiastic about her involvement, recognizing that her expertise could help prepare his small department for threats they had never had to consider before. "We've always focused on fires, medical emergencies, and weather-related disasters," Rodriguez explained during one of their planning sessions. "But what happened last week shows that we need to be ready for other kinds of threats, too." Together, they developed response plans for chemical spills, suspicious packages, and potential terrorist incidents. Sienna helped train the firefighters and EMTs in basic threat recognition and proper communication protocols with state and federal agencies. It wasn't the same as her old EOD work, but it gave her a way to use her skills and experience to serve the community that had become her home. More importantly, it helped her feel connected to something larger than herself again. She also began visiting the regional high school once a month to speak to students about military service, emergency preparedness, and career opportunities in public safety. Many of the young people she met reminded her of herself at that age, looking for purpose and direction, wanting to make a difference in the world but unsure how to do it. One student in particular, a 17-year-old named Maria Santos, had shown exceptional interest in Sienna's work. Maria was considering a career in law enforcement or emergency services, and she peppered Sienna with questions about training, education, and the realities of dangerous work. "How do you stay calm when everything is going wrong?" Maria had asked during one visit, her dark eyes serious and intent. "Training helps a lot," Sienna had replied. "But mostly it's about remembering why you're doing the work. When you focus on protecting other people, your own fears become less important. The mission becomes bigger than your personal concerns." It was advice that Sienna realized she needed to follow herself. For 3 years, she had focused on her own trauma and pain, allowing her worst memories to define her entire relationship with her military service. But when she shifted her attention back to serving others, the healing had begun naturally.
"What was the scariest moment of your career?" another student had asked. Sienna had thought carefully before answering. "The scariest moments weren't when I was in immediate physical danger. They were when I had to make decisions that I knew would affect other people's lives. The responsibility can be overwhelming if you let it be. How do you handle that kind of pressure? You train until the right responses become automatic. And you remember that doing nothing is also a choice, usually the wrong one. When people are in danger, you have to act, even if you're scared." The town council had officially appointed her as emergency preparedness consultant, a volunteer position that involved reviewing safety protocols and providing advice during crisis situations. It was exactly the kind of second chance that she hadn't known she was looking for. The role came with a small budget for training materials and equipment, and Sienna had used it to purchase basic detection equipment for the fire department and to establish communication protocols with state and federal agencies. She had also organized training exercises with surrounding communities, helping to build regional cooperation for emergency response. One evening in late autumn, as she and Rex walked through her fields checking on the final harvest of the season, Sienna reflected on how much had changed since that day at Murphy's Market. The corn had been harvested weeks earlier, and the fields were now prepared for winter. The last of the tomatoes had been processed into sauce and preserves, enough to last through the cold months ahead. The simple rhythms of farming continued to provide structure and satisfaction to her life. But now she had something more. She had reconnected with her sense of purpose, found a way to honor her military service while building a new life in civilian society. The trauma of her final mission would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her entire identity. "I think we're finally finding our way, aren't we, boy?" she said to Rex as they walked. Rex stopped suddenly, his ears pricked forward. For a moment, Sienna felt a familiar spike of adrenaline, wondering if he had detected another threat. But then she saw what had caught his attention: a family of deer grazing peacefully at the edge of the woods, their white tails flicking as they browsed among the fallen leaves. Rex watched the deer with interest, but without alarm. His instincts were still sharp, but he had learned to distinguish between genuine threats and harmless wildlife. It was a lesson that Sienna was still learning herself: how to remain alert and prepared without letting fear dominate her life. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the deer until they eventually wandered back into the forest. Then they continued their walk, two veterans enjoying the peace they had helped to preserve. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and Sienna felt a deep contentment that had been missing from her life for too long. She had found a way to be useful again, to serve her community and honor the skills that had defined so much of her life. More importantly, she had found a way to live with her memories, all of them, both good and bad, without being paralyzed by them. Winter came early to Millbrook that year, with the first snow falling in November and temperatures dropping below freezing weeks earlier than usual. Sienna spent the cold months planning for the next growing season, maintaining her farm equipment, and continuing her volunteer work with the Emergency Preparedness Committee. The committee had grown from the original small group to include representatives from surrounding communities, creating a regional network for sharing resources and expertise. Sienna found satisfaction in watching other people develop the skills and confidence needed to handle emergency situations. Rex aged gracefully through the winter, spending most of his time by the fireplace, but still alert and engaged when duty called. Sienna could see that he was slowing down significantly, but his spirit remained strong. Their bond, forged through years of dangerous work together, had only deepened during their retirement. In February, an unexpected visitor arrived at the farm. Sergeant Foster from the State Police Bomb Squad knocked on Sienna's door on a cold Tuesday morning, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Ms. Walsh, I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I wanted to update you personally on the investigation into the incident here in Millbrook." Sienna invited her in for coffee, curious about what the investigation had revealed. They sat at Sienna's kitchen table, while Rex dozed by the fireplace, the warmth from the fire creating a cozy contrast to the winter landscape outside. "We traced the origin of the explosive device," Foster continued after warming her hands on the coffee mug. "It was part of a larger domestic terrorism plot targeting small rural communities across Pennsylvania and neighboring states." "Domestic terrorism?" Sienna asked, surprised. She had assumed the threat might have been international in origin. A lone actor with extremist ideologies, he was attempting to create fear and chaos in areas where people felt safe, where security was minimal. His goal was to prove that nowhere in America was truly secure from attack. Foster pulled out a file folder from her briefcase. The perpetrator had conducted surveillance on at least a dozen small towns, identifying what he considered soft targets, places with limited security, slow emergency response times, and symbolic value as representatives of traditional American life. "Was anyone else actually targeted?" Sienna asked, thinking about other communities that might have faced similar threats. 3 other communities in the region, but none of the other devices were successfully deployed. Your intervention here led us to the suspect before he could carry out the rest of his plan. We found detailed plans, additional explosive materials, and surveillance notes on his other targets. Foster reached into her briefcase and pulled out an official-looking document with government seals and formal letterhead. The FBI wanted me to deliver this personally. It's a commendation for your actions that day. Your quick thinking and professional response prevented multiple terrorist attacks and saved numerous lives. Sienna looked at the certificate, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Recognition was gratifying, but more important was knowing that their actions had prevented other communities from experiencing what could have been devastating tragedies. There's something else, Foster continued. The Bureau has a program that provides support for retired military working dogs and their handlers. Rex's service record, combined with his successful detection that day, has made him eligible for some special recognition. She pulled out another document, this one with Rex's name prominently displayed. It's an honorary citation for exceptional service in the protection of civilian populations. It comes with a small pension to help with his veterinary care during his retirement years. Sienna felt tears forming in her eyes as she looked at Rex, who was lying peacefully by the fireplace, unaware that he was being honored for his years of faithful service. The gesture meant more to her than any recognition of her own actions. "He earned it," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Foster stayed for another hour, sharing stories from her own career and discussing the ongoing challenges of protecting communities from various threats. When she left, Sienna felt a renewed sense of connection to the broader community of people dedicated to public safety. Spring arrived with unusual warmth that year, and Sienna threw herself into preparing her fields for planting. The physical work was therapeutic, and she found deep satisfaction in the promise of new growth and fresh beginnings that came with each farming season. Rex still accompanied her on her daily rounds, though he moved more slowly now and needed frequent rests in the shade. His hearing had continued to deteriorate since his injury years before, but his other senses remained sharp, and his loyalty and affection were unchanged. One morning in April, as they walked through the newly planted cornfield, checking for signs of germination, Rex suddenly stopped and pointed toward the road with the focused attention Sienna knew well. She looked up to see a car pulling into her driveway, an official-looking sedan with government license plates. Two people got out of the car, a man in a military uniform and a woman in civilian clothes. Sienna recognized the uniform insignia. He was from the Army's EOD Command, the unit she had served with for so many years. "Ms. Walsh?" the officer called as he approached across the farmyard. "I'm Major Rodriguez, and this is Dr. Sarah Chen from the Military Working Dog Program. We'd like to speak with you about Rex." Sienna's heart sank momentarily, wondering if something was wrong or if there were questions about Rex's military service. But Major Rodriguez quickly smiled and raised his hand reassuringly. "Nothing to worry about, ma'am. Actually, we're here with some very good news that I think you'll be pleased to hear." They explained that Rex had been selected for induction into the Military Working Dog Hall of Fame, an honor reserved for animals who had demonstrated exceptional service and saved human lives through their work. It was one of the highest recognitions available to military working dogs. "His record is remarkable," Dr. Chen explained, consulting a thick file folder. "Over 300 successful explosive detections during his active service, with 0 false positives. And his recent work here in Millbrook demonstrated that his abilities and instincts remained intact even years after retirement." The ceremony would be held at the National Military Working Dog Team's National Monument in San Antonio, Texas, and Rex would be one of only 12 dogs inducted that year from among thousands of candidates. "We'd like you to be there as his handler," Major Rodriguez added. The bond between working dog teams is something we want to recognize and honor as part of the ceremony. Sienna looked down at Rex, who was sitting calmly beside her, unaware of the honor being discussed. She thought about their years together, the lives they had saved, the dangers they had faced as a team, and the quiet dignity with which he had handled his retirement. "We'll be honored to attend," she said without hesitation.
The ceremony at the National Military Working Dog Team's National Monument took place on a beautiful day in May. Sienna had driven the 8 hours to San Antonio, with Rex sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat, occasionally waking to look out the window at the passing countryside with the patient interest of a well-traveled dog. The monument itself was more impressive than Sienna had expected, a bronze sculpture depicting a soldier and military working dog, surrounded by granite walls inscribed with the names of thousands of animals who had served alongside human troops throughout American military history. The setting was both solemn and celebratory, acknowledging the sacrifices made by working dogs while celebrating their contributions to military missions and the safety of their human partners. Dozens of people attended the ceremony: active duty handlers with their current partners, veterans like Sienna with their retired dogs, family members of handlers who had been killed in action, and military officials recognizing the importance of the human-animal bond in military service. Rex was one of 12 dogs being honored that day, each with a remarkable record of service that had saved human lives. There was Max, a Belgian Malinois who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and detected over 400 explosive devices. There was Luna, a German Shepherd who had worked in drug interdiction and made seizures worth millions of dollars. There was Duke, a Labrador who had served with Special Operations Forces and participated in classified missions that couldn't be publicly described. Each animal had a story of dedication, courage, and service that had made a real difference in the world. When Rex's name was called, Sienna walked forward with him to accept his award. He moved slowly but with dignity, his graying muzzle held high, and his bearing still showing traces of the proud working dog he had been. The citation read his accomplishments: for exceptional service in the detection and disposal of explosive devices, resulting in the preservation of countless human lives, both in military operations overseas and in civilian emergency response. As Sienna accepted the bronze plaque on Rex's behalf, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From young partners learning to work together, through years of dangerous missions in hostile territory, to the trauma that ended their active service, and finally to their new life in Millbrook, where they had found purpose and peace again. The ceremony included remarks from senior military officials about the vital role of working dogs in modern military operations. General Patricia Hayes, commander of the Army's Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear, and Explosives Command, spoke about how working dogs had evolved from simple sentries to sophisticated detection specialists whose abilities often exceeded the most advanced technological equipment. "These animals," General Hayes said, looking out over the assembled handlers and their partners, "represent the finest traditions of military service. Their loyalty, courage, and dedication have saved thousands of lives and made countless missions possible. They ask for nothing more than the opportunity to serve alongside their human partners." After the ceremony, several other veterans approached Sienna to share their own stories. She met John, whose partner had been killed by an IED explosion in Iraq, leaving him to carry on their mission alone. She talked with Maria, whose dog had been injured in an attack, but had recovered to work for several more years before retiring. Each person understood the unique bond between handler and working dog, the way that partnership transcended normal pet ownership to become something closer to family. "It never really ends, does it?" asked Sarah, a former Navy handler whose dog had passed away the year before. The connection, the sense of responsibility for each other. Sienna nodded, understanding completely. "They give everything they have, and we owe them the same in return."
"Have you thought about getting another working dog?" asked Tom, a Marine veteran whose partner had also been honored that day. I know it's not the same, but there are always dogs in need of experienced handlers. Sienna looked down at Rex, who was resting in the shade with several other honored dogs, all of them elderly but still alert. Not yet, she said. Rex and I still have time together, and when that time ends, well, I'll have to see what feels right then. The drive home was peaceful, with Rex sleeping most of the way. Sienna reflected on how far they had both come since leaving the military. The trauma and pain of their final mission would always be part of their story, but it no longer overshadowed everything else they had accomplished. They had found a way to honor their service while building a new life. The farm provided peace and stability, while their emergency preparedness work allowed them to continue serving their community in meaningful ways. It wasn't the same as their old life, but it was fulfilling in its own way. When they arrived back in Millbrook, several neighbors had gathered at the farm to welcome them home. Mrs. Chen had prepared a celebration dinner, and Officer Martinez was there with his family. Tom Murphy from the general store had brought a new collar for Rex with his name and Military Working Dog Hall of Fame engraved on the brass nameplate. We wanted to show you both how proud we are, Mrs. Chen explained, her eyes bright with emotion. What you did for our community, what you've done for your country, it matters to all of us. Mayor Williams presented Rex with an honorary key to the city, a gesture that was both touching and slightly absurd given that Rex couldn't actually use it. But the symbolism was important to the community, a way of showing that they understood and appreciated what Rex represented. That evening, as Sienna and Rex sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path their lives had taken. The journey hadn't been easy, and there had been times when she wondered if they would ever find peace again. But they had. Through service to others, through the support of a caring community, and through the unbreakable bond between them, they had found a way to heal and to continue making a difference in the world. Rex rested his graying head on her knee, and Sienna stroked his fur gently. We did good work, didn't we, partner? His tail wagged slowly, and in that simple gesture, she found all the confirmation she needed. The months following Rex's recognition brought new opportunities for Sienna to share her knowledge and experience with others. Word of her expertise had spread beyond Millbrook, and she began receiving invitations to speak at regional conferences and training events. The first major speaking engagement came from the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, which invited her to address their annual conference on rural emergency preparedness. Standing before an audience of emergency managers, first responders, and public safety officials, Sienna felt nervous for the first time in years. 3 years ago, I thought my service was over, she began, looking out over the audience of several hundred people. I had retired from the military with my partner Rex, and I was trying to build a quiet life as a farmer. I thought the skills I had learned in the Army were part of my past, not my future. She went on to describe the incident at Murphy's Market, emphasizing how the combination of Rex's training, her own experience, and quick action by local officials had prevented a tragedy. But more importantly, she talked about how the experience had taught her that service never really ends. It just takes different forms. The threats we face may change, and the ways we serve our communities may evolve, but the fundamental responsibility remains the same, she said. We have a duty to use whatever skills and experience we have to protect innocent people from harm. The response was overwhelmingly positive. After her presentation, dozens of people approached her with questions about training programs, emergency protocols, and how small communities could better prepare for unexpected threats. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, no relation despite the shared surname, a professor of emergency management at Penn State University, was particularly interested in Sienna's insights. "We need more voices like yours in the field," she said. "People who have real operational experience and can translate that into practical guidance for civilian applications." This conversation led to Sienna's involvement in developing a new curriculum for emergency management students, focusing on the integration of military experience into civilian emergency response. She began making regular trips to the university campus, guest lecturing in Dr. Walsh's classes, and working with students on research projects. One of these projects involved studying the use of detection dogs in civilian law enforcement and emergency response. Sienna worked with a team of graduate students to analyze the effectiveness of different training methods and to develop best practices for integrating working dogs into municipal emergency services. The research brought her into contact with active duty handlers and civilian dog teams from around the country. She was struck by how much the field had evolved since her own service, with new training techniques and technologies that enhance the already remarkable capabilities of working dogs. "The bond between handler and dog is still the most important factor," she told the students. "All the technology in the world can't replace that partnership, that trust and communication that develops over years of working together." Back in Millbrook, Sienna's role in the community continued to expand. The Emergency Preparedness Committee had grown into a regional organization that coordinated training and resource sharing among a dozen small towns. Sienna found herself serving as an informal advisor to police chiefs, fire departments, and emergency managers throughout the area. The work was intellectually stimulating and personally fulfilling, but it also highlighted how much Rex was slowing down. The long drives to conferences and universities were becoming difficult for him, and she could see that the constant travel was taking a toll on his aging body. Dr. Stevens had been monitoring Rex's health closely, and during a routine checkup in the fall, he delivered news that Sienna had been dreading. "His heart is showing signs of strain," Dr. Stevens explained gently. "It's not uncommon in dogs his age, especially those who've had demanding careers. He's not in immediate danger, but we need to be realistic about his limitations." Sienna made the difficult decision to scale back her travel and speaking engagements, focusing instead on activities that would allow Rex to remain comfortable at home. She developed online training materials and began conducting webinars for emergency management professionals, sharing her expertise without having to leave Millbrook. The farm became a destination for small groups of emergency responders who wanted hands-on training in threat recognition and crisis management. Sienna would host weekend workshops where police officers, firefighters, and EMTs could practice scenarios and learn from each other's experiences. These sessions often featured Rex as a living example of detection work, though his role was now limited to demonstrations rather than active training. He seemed to enjoy the attention and the opportunity to show off his skills, even if he could no longer work at the intense pace of his younger years. One participant in these workshops was Officer Lisa Martinez, the daughter of Sienna's friend, Luis Martinez. Lisa had recently graduated from the police academy and was eager to learn everything she could about law enforcement. "I grew up hearing stories about what you and Rex did," Lisa told Sienna during one of the workshops. "It inspired me to pursue a career in public safety." These personal connections reminded Sienna of the ripple effects of service, how one act of courage or dedication could inspire others to follow similar paths. She had saved lives directly through her military work and her intervention in Millbrook, but she was also influencing a new generation of public safety professionals. Winter arrived early again that year, and Rex spent increasingly long periods sleeping by the fireplace. He still enjoyed short walks around the farm and showed interest in the activities around him, but Sienna could see that he was preparing for the end of his remarkable life. In December, Dr. Stevens approached Sienna with an unexpected proposal that would change the direction of her life once again. "There's a young German shepherd at the animal shelter in the county seat," he said during one of his visits to check on Rex. "She's about 2 years old, very intelligent, and she's been there for months because she's too energetic and focused for most families." Sienna's first instinct was to say no. No dog could replace Rex, and she wasn't sure she was ready to open her heart to another partner while Rex was still with her. But Dr. Stevens persisted. "The shelter director says she's been returned twice by families who adopted her thinking they wanted a calm pet. But she needs work, purpose. She's too smart to be happy just lying around." "What makes you think I should consider her?" Sienna asked. "Because she reminds me of Rex when he was young. She has that intensity, that focus that separates working dogs from pets. And frankly, I think she might benefit from learning from a master before." He didn't finish the sentence, but Sienna understood. Rex's time was limited, and if she was going to train another dog, having Rex's guidance and example might be invaluable. Sienna agreed to visit the shelter, more out of curiosity than genuine interest in adoption. But when she met Stella, something stirred in her chest that she hadn't felt since Rex's earlier years. The young dog was alert, responsive, and showed the kind of intelligence that reminded Sienna of Rex at that age. She was clearly frustrated by the kennel environment, pacing restlessly, and showing the kind of focus that indicated a need for meaningful work. "She's been returned twice," the shelter worker explained, echoing what Dr. Stevens had told her. "The first family brought her back because she kept finding things around the house. She would bring them toys, shoes, anything with interesting scents. The second family said she was too intense, too demanding of attention and activity." Sienna looked into Stella's bright eyes and saw potential. Not a replacement for Rex, that was impossible. But perhaps a new partner for a new chapter of her life. She adopted Stella that day, bringing her home to meet Rex and begin the process of integration into their household. Rex's reaction to the young dog was initially cautious but not hostile. He seemed to understand that Stella was going to be part of their pack, and he gradually began to accept her presence. More surprisingly, he seemed to take on a mentoring role, showing Stella the routines of farm life and the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Training began immediately. Stella showed remarkable aptitude for detection work, though Sienna kept their practice sessions focused on non-dangerous materials, like specific scents hidden around the farm. They worked on discipline, obedience, and the kind of partnership that had made her and Rex so effective. Stella would never be a military working dog. Those days were behind Sienna. But she could be trained for civilian emergency response, helping to protect the community that had become Sienna's home. The young dog learned quickly, showing the kind of intelligence and drive that Sienna remembered from Rex's early training. But more importantly, she seemed to understand that she was part of something larger than herself, that her work had meaning beyond simple obedience exercises. Rex watched these training sessions with apparent approval, occasionally demonstrating techniques or correcting Stella's form with gentle but firm guidance. It was touching to see the older dog passing on his knowledge to the younger one, ensuring that his legacy would continue. Spring brought both joy and sorrow to the farm. Stella had progressed remarkably in her training and was beginning to show the kind of reliability that would make her useful in emergency situations. But Rex's health was clearly declining, and Dr. Stevens warned that his time was growing short. "His heart is failing gradually," Dr. Stevens explained during what would be his final house call for Rex. "He's not in pain, but his body is simply wearing out." It's remarkable that he's lasted this long, given his age and the demands of his career. Sienna knew that Rex was dying, and she could see in his eyes that he knew it too. But he seemed at peace, content to spend his final days in the comfort of the farm he had helped to protect. surrounded by the people and places he loved. On a warm morning in May, exactly 2 years after his induction into the Military Working Dog Hall of Fame, Rex passed peacefully in his sleep under the oak tree where he had spent so many happy hours. Sienna found him there, looking for all the world as if he was simply taking one of his afternoon naps. The funeral drew people from across the state and beyond. Military personnel came to honor a fallen partner. Members of the bomb squad attended to pay their respects to a dog who had saved countless lives. The entire town of Millbrook turned out to say goodbye to their four-legged hero. Sergeant Foster drove down from the state capitol to attend, bringing with her several members of the bomb squad who had worked the incident at Murphy's Market. "Rex saved my team that day," she said simply. "We owe him a debt we can never repay." Major Rodriguez flew in from Washington, representing the Army's EOD command and bringing official recognition of Rex's service from the Department of Defense. "Rex represents the finest traditions of military service," he said during the ceremony. "His courage, dedication, and sacrifice embody the values we strive to uphold." Students from Penn State University came with Dr. Walsh, many of them having studied Rex's service record as part of their emergency management coursework. Local emergency responders attended in uniform, understanding that they were saying goodbye to a colleague who had helped protect their community. But perhaps most meaningfully, the people of Millbrook came to honor the dog who had become a symbol of their own safety and security. Families with children, elderly couples, teenagers who had grown up hearing stories about Rex's heroism, they all understood that they were losing someone who had been part of their community's identity. Sienna buried Rex under the oak tree where he had spent so many peaceful hours, the spot where he had died naturally and without pain. The headstone was simple granite with a bronze plaque. "Rex, military working dog. Faithful partner. Lifesaver. 2013 to 2027. His courage saved countless lives." The inscription included his service record, the locations where he had served, the number of devices he had detected, and the decorations he had earned. But it also included a simple personal message from Sienna: "The best partner I could have asked for." In the months that followed, Sienna continued her work with the Emergency Preparedness Committee and her teaching at Penn State. But there was an emptiness without Rex that was difficult to overcome. For over 14 years, he had been her constant companion, her partner in the most meaningful work of her life. Learning to live without him was perhaps the greatest challenge she had ever faced, more difficult in some ways than the trauma that had ended their military career. Rex had been not just a working partner, but a connection to her identity as a soldier and protector. Stella helped fill some of the void, but she was young and energetic in ways that reminded Sienna constantly of what she had lost. The young dog was eager to work and learn, but she lacked the calm wisdom that had made Rex such an exceptional partner. 6 months after Rex's death, Sienna faced her first real test with Stella, when a gas leak at the regional high school required evacuation and careful investigation of possible explosive hazards. The leak had occurred near the school's chemistry laboratory, and there was concern that chemical reactions might have created dangerous conditions. Stella worked alongside the professional teams, her training allowing her to assist in ensuring the building was safe before students and staff returned. She performed well, showing the kind of focus and reliability that Sienna had hoped to develop in her. It wasn't the same as working with Rex, but it was meaningful work with a purpose. Sienna had found a way to honor her past while building a future, to remember her fallen partner while opening her heart to a new one. The school incident also marked a milestone in Sienna's own healing. For the first time since Rex's death, she felt truly confident in her ability to continue their work with a new partner. Stella would never replace Rex, but she could carry on his legacy in her own way.
As Stella matured and her training progressed, Sienna began to see glimpses of the exceptional working dog she might become. The young German Shepherd had inherited the intelligence and drive that characterized the best working dogs, but she also had her own personality and approach to the work. Where Rex had been methodical and patient, Stella was energetic and intuitive. She learned quickly, but sometimes needed reminders to slow down and think through problems completely. She was eager to please, but also showed the kind of independence that would serve her well in emergency situations. The regional emergency management community had grown to depend on Sienna's expertise, and Stella's developing abilities added a new dimension to the services they could provide. The young dog was becoming skilled at detecting gas leaks, chemical spills, and other hazardous materials that posed threats to public safety. Dr. Walsh at Penn State invited Sienna to establish a formal research program studying the use of working dogs in civilian emergency response. The program would provide funding for Stella's continued training while contributing to the academic understanding of human-animal partnerships in public safety work. You've demonstrated that retired military personnel and their partners can make valuable contributions to civilian emergency preparedness, Doctor. Walsh explained during one of their planning meetings. We need to document these approaches so other communities can benefit from your experience. The research program attracted attention from emergency management professionals around the country. Sienna found herself consulting with communities that wanted to establish their own working dog programs, sharing the lessons she had learned through years of experience. One particularly rewarding project involved working with a small town in West Virginia that had experienced a chemical plant explosion. The community was struggling to rebuild confidence in their emergency response capabilities, and they wanted Sienna's help in developing better preparedness protocols. We realized we were completely unprepared for what happened, the town's emergency manager explained. We need someone who understands both the technical aspects of emergency response and the human factors involved in crisis management. Sienna spent several weeks in the West Virginia community, working with local officials to develop response plans and training programs. Stella accompanied her, demonstrating detection techniques and helping to train local first responders in working with detection dogs. The experience reminded Sienna of her early days in the military, when she had been eager to make a difference and help protect communities from harm. But it also showed her how much she had grown as a teacher and mentor, able to share not just technical knowledge, but wisdom gained through years of experience. Back in Millbrook, life settled into new routines that honored the past while embracing the future. Sienna continued her farming, finding therapeutic value in the cycles of planting and harvest that marked the passage of time. The vegetables she grew fed her community and provided a connection to the land that grounded her in the present. Stella became a familiar sight around town, accompanying Sienna on errands and gradually earning the trust and affection of the townspeople. She was different from Rex in many ways, but she was developing her own relationship with the community that had come to value their protection. Mayor Williams appointed Stella as an honorary member of the town's emergency response team, a gesture that was both practical and symbolic. The young dog had proven her abilities in several real emergency situations, and her presence provided reassurance to residents who remembered how Rex had protected them. On quiet evenings, Sienna would sit under the oak tree where Rex was buried, with Stella beside her, and the farm stretching out in all directions. Sometimes she would tell the young dog stories about her predecessor, about the missions they had completed, and the lives they had saved. Stella would listen with the patient attention of a working dog, as if understanding that she was part of a legacy that extended beyond herself. In those moments, Sienna felt the presence of all the partners she had served with, human and canine alike, and knew that their work continued. The farm prospered under Sienna's careful management, and her emergency preparedness work expanded to include training programs for working dogs throughout the region. She had found a way to use all of her experiences, military service, trauma, healing, and renewal, to serve others and contribute to her community's safety. 5 years after Rex's death, Sienna stood before another audience at a national emergency management conference, this time as a recognized expert in the field of civilian working dog programs. Stella, now 7 years old and at the peak of her abilities, lay calmly beside the podium, her bearing showing the confidence of a seasoned professional. When I started this journey, Sienna began, looking out over the audience of several hundred emergency management professionals, I thought I was simply trying to find a quiet retirement for myself and my partner. I never imagined that our experiences would lead to a new career in civilian emergency preparedness. She described the evolution of her work from that first incident at Murphy's Market to the establishment of working dog programs in dozens of communities across multiple states. But more importantly, she talked about the lessons she had learned about healing, purpose, and the different ways that service could manifest throughout a person's life. Military service teaches us valuable skills and ways of thinking about problems, she said. But the transition to civilian life requires us to find new ways to use those skills, new ways to serve our communities, and find meaning in our work. In the audience, she could see familiar faces, students she had taught, emergency managers she had worked with, fellow veterans who had found their own paths to continued service. The network of people working to improve emergency preparedness had grown far beyond what she could have imagined when she first started speaking at conferences. After the presentation, a young Army veteran approached her. "Ma'am, I'm getting ready to retire from EOD work, and I'm trying to figure out what comes next. Do you have any advice?" Sienna looked at the young soldier, seeing herself at a similar crossroads years earlier. "Don't try to completely leave your old life behind," she said. "The skills you've learned, the experiences you've had, they're valuable in ways you might not realize yet. Find ways to use them in service of something larger than yourself." "What if I feel like I failed, like my service ended badly?" "Then you're not alone in that feeling," Sienna replied gently. "But failure isn't the end of the story unless you let it be. Sometimes the most important work we do comes after we think our service is over." That conversation reminded Sienna of how far she had come from the broken veteran who had fled to Millbrook seeking only peace and anonymity. She had found much more than that. She had found a new way to serve, a community that valued her contributions, and a sense of purpose that honored both her past and her future. The research program at Penn State had documented the effectiveness of civilian working dog programs, providing evidence-based guidance for communities wanting to establish their own capabilities. Sienna's work had influenced emergency preparedness policy at the state and federal levels, helping to integrate lessons learned from military experience into civilian applications. But perhaps more importantly, she had demonstrated that healing from trauma didn't require forgetting the past or abandoning the skills and identity that military service had provided. Instead, it meant finding new ways to use those experiences in service of others. Stella had become one of the most accomplished civilian detection dogs in the region, with a record of successful detections that rivaled the best military working dogs. But more than that, she had become a symbol of the possibilities that existed when experience, training, and dedication were combined with community support. On the drive back to Millbrook after the conference, Sienna reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The farmland of Pennsylvania rolled past the truck windows, peaceful and prosperous, representing the kind of communities she had spent her life protecting. "We've built something good here, haven't we, girl?" she said to Stella, who was riding in the passenger seat with the patient alertness of a seasoned traveler. Stella's ears perked up at the sound of her name, and she looked at Sienna with the kind of trust and partnership that had defined all of her most important relationships, different from what she had shared with Rex, but meaningful in its own way. As they approached Millbrook, Sienna could see the familiar landmarks that had become home, the grain elevator that marked the edge of town, the water tower with the high school mascot painted on its side, the church steeple that rose above the tree line. It was a community that had embraced her when she needed healing, that had supported her when she found new purpose, and that had given her the opportunity to continue serving long after she thought her service was over. 10 years after the incident at Murphy's Market, Sienna Walsh stood in her vegetable garden on a warm spring morning, watching as a new generation of emergency responders practiced detection techniques with their canine partners. The annual regional training exercise had grown to include teams from across Pennsylvania and neighboring states, bringing together military veterans, civilian first responders, and working dogs in a celebration of partnership and preparedness. Stella, now in her middle years but still sharp and capable, supervised the training with the patient authority of an experienced teacher. Beside her, a young German shepherd named Rex II, named in honor of his predecessor, watched with the eager attention of a dog just beginning his career. Rex II was Sienna's latest partner, a dog she had begun training 2 years earlier when it became clear that Stella would eventually need to step back from active duty. The cycle of partnership continued, each dog learning from his predecessors while bringing his own unique abilities to the work. The farm had become a destination for people seeking to understand the integration of military experience into civilian emergency preparedness. Researchers, emergency managers, and military personnel came regularly to study the programs Sienna had developed and to learn from her experiences. But for Sienna, the most meaningful aspect of her work remained the simple act of service, being ready to respond when her community needed protection, training others to carry on the work, and honoring the memory of all the partners who had served alongside her. In the corner of the garden, under the oak tree where the original Rex was buried, a small memorial garden had grown over the years. Flowers planted by grateful community members bloomed throughout the growing season, and a simple stone bench provided a place for reflection and remembrance. Sienna often sat there in the evenings, sometimes alone, and sometimes with whichever dog was currently her partner, thinking about the long journey that had brought her to this place of peace and purpose. The trauma that had ended her military career would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her entire relationship with her past. She had learned that healing didn't require forgetting, and that service could take many different forms throughout a person's life.
Years of working with emergency responders, teaching students, and training dogs had shown her that her experiences, all of them, both good and bad, had prepared her for exactly the kind of work she was doing. The skills learned in military service, the resilience developed through trauma, and the wisdom gained through healing had all contributed to her to serve her community and train others. As the sun set over the fields of Millbrook, painting the sky in brilliant colors that reminded her of sunsets she had watched in far-off places during her military service, Sienna felt a deep contentment that had taken years to achieve. She had found a way to honor her past while building a meaningful future. She had discovered that heroism wasn't about dramatic moments or public recognition, but about showing up every day and using whatever skills and experience you had to make the world a little bit safer for the people around you. Whether that meant detecting bombs in a war zone, preventing a terrorist attack in a small town, or training the next generation of emergency responders, the principle was the same. When danger threatened innocent people, you stepped forward. You did what needed to be done. You served. And in that service, broken hearts could heal. Trauma could transform into wisdom. And ordinary people could become the heroes their communities needed. Rex would have been proud, and that knowledge was enough. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.